Amen. Amen. You may be seated. We come now to our exhortation this morning as we prepare to confess our sin. And our exhortation comes from 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 13 and 14, which reads, "Therefore prepare your minds for action, and being sober-minded, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance." In 1 Peter, we find a letter to the church that's scattered throughout Asia Minor, written 5 to 10 years before the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Peter is writing to encourage the church to endure suffering and persecution, to remain faithful in distressing times. And a big theme of the book we see here is preparation. It's here in this verse we just read, "Therefore preparing your minds for action." But again in chapter 3, always being prepared to make a defense to anybody who asks for a reason for the hope that is in you. In chapter 4, "Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes to test you." So this theme of preparation, being prepared, not being surprised, persists throughout this letter. So how are we to be prepared? Well, throughout the letter, Peter tells us to be prepared by being sober-minded. This term, sober-minded, is also repeated several times throughout the letter. Again, in the passage we just read, being sober-minded, you set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. In chapter 4, verse 7, be self-controlled and sober-minded for the sake of your prayers. And then again in chapter 5, verse 8, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. So, what does it mean to be sober-minded? In that passage in chapter 5, sober-minded is listed along with being watchful. And then in that passage in chapter 4, sober-minded is paired with being self-controlled. So being watchful, being self-controlled are both aspects of being sober-minded, and those fit with the literal definition of being sober-minded, of being sober, right? Of not being intoxicated or drunk. When you're intoxicated, you lose control of your body and of your inhibitions. So both your physical and moral faculties are impaired when you are by drugs and alcohol, when you are intoxicated. But our passage this morning shows us that we can also lose our sobriety through overindulgence in our passions and our emotions. So it's not just talking about literal drunkenness and soberness. It's talking about it's translated as sober-minded in a lot of translations because it's not just talking about that. And this passage wants to point us to the fact that we can lose our sober-mindedness through overindulgence in our passions or our emotions. So let's read it again. "Therefore, preparing your minds for action and being sober-minded, set your hope fully on the grace that will be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance." When we give into our passions and the passions of others, stress, fear, anxiety, anger, lust, we're not being sober-minded. It's important to note that this phrase, being conformed to your passions, not only indicates giving into a momentary fit of passion. Yes, that would definitely be an instance of not being sober-minded. But we're specifically warned about the persistent, habitual failure to take control of our emotions, which that pattern conforms us to those emotions and leaves us unprepared for action and unprepared for obedience. I'll give a few examples. If you're regularly giving in to envy and covetousness, so if that's a pattern in your life that you're just kind of on a low boil all the time, you will become molded into an ungrateful person who is never pleased by anything. By not confessing and repenting from your anger, you can become a grouch who exasperates his wife and his children. Many men become passive, non-confrontational leaders because they've been conformed by persistent, habitual fear. Haven't we seen this so many times over the last several years? when COVID or George Floyd or the latest media crisis works the country into a frenzy, how many Christian leaders are caught flat-footed and unable to think biblically? Peter is saying that they were drunk on the job, those leaders who lost their sobriety, who lost their wits in the midst of this frenzy of emotion that's going on around them. They were drunk on the job. They had been conformed to their passions, their fear, their love of money and approval, and were not ready and not able to respond sober-mindedly to those issues. And the reality is that these same kinds of things are happening in our homes and in our jobs every day. Trials, inter-office drama, market dynamics, illness, kids' behavior issues, all of these things will inevitably come. Will you be found ready to meet them with a sober mind? Prepare your minds for action. Do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance.